All right, so here we go with our next part on our video lecture, Chapter 12, Western Europe during the post-classical era known as the Middle Ages. So we're going to look at the invasion of Europe. Europe gets invaded by all different people. We have Vikings from the north, we have the Magyars from the east, and we have the Muslims from the south. Vikings, of course, are famous killers and plunderers and explorers and sailors and warriors, and they went around on these huge long ships. They had swords and axes, and they killed a whole bunch of people. At first, they targeted people who were defenseless, like monks living in monasteries, and they looked for pleasure, treasure, and they looked for plunder, and they looked for wealth at first. But the reason why the Vikings left their homeland, which is in Scandinavia is up here, right? This is their homeland. Scandinavia includes places like Denmark and Norway and Sweden. So this is the original Viking homeland, and because it's so far up north, it was very, very, very cold, which means that their agricultural surplus, their food production surplus, was minimum. Which means that as their population was growing steadily, it came to the point that there wasn't enough resources for them to stay at home. So many of them had to go elsewhere to find a living and a fortune somewhere else. So they start sailing. They sail across the North Sea, which is here. They sail across the Baltic Sea. They even go across the Atlantic Ocean. They go into parts of the Mediterranean. They even go into the Black Sea by sailing up and down all these different rivers. So the Vikings are great mariners, right? They're sailors. Now the Vikings, of course, are famous for their religion, the Norse religion or the Nordic religion, the followers of Thor and Loki and Odin. But eventually they will settle down in different parts of Europe and convert to Christianity. Now they're going to be looking for land. That's the main real motivation for the Viking explorations and raids and attacks. They're looking for land to settle down. And eventually they're going to set up colonies, Viking colonies. They're going to go to Iceland, they're going to go to Greenland, and they're going to go to Vinland. Now Vinland is unique because Vinland is all the way in Canada, what is now called Newfoundland. But Vinland was it was a European colony set up by the Vikings in North America about 500 years before Columbus was even born. So the Vikings sailed across the oceans, across the seas, through the rivers, pretty much everywhere that it was possible to sail, they were able to do so. And here we see the expansions and the explorations of these merchant mariners is the other name for them, right? The Norse merchant mariners. But even though they come in conflict and they fight with a whole bunch of people, they also eventually learn to settle down, especially after adopting Christianity. They realize it's not such a good thing to go around killing monks and nuns. So eventually they settle down. And the main place where they're going to settle down is going to be in northern France, in a territory that became known as Normandy. And Normandy it translates to the land of the Normans. And the Normans is another way of saying the Northmen. And the Northmen is another name for the Vikings, because they came from the northern parts of Europe. So from Normandy, the Vikings, or the Normans by then, are going to be called the Normans. They're also going to conquer England. And they're going to defeat the Germanic tribes that live there, the Anglo-Saxons. And they're going to establish a new kingdom of England, right, under Norman rule. They're also going to rule parts of northern France, which was called Normandy. They're also going to move and settle down into parts of Kievan Rus and become the rulers there of Kievan Rus. And they're going to be the ones who are going to help set up, Russia later on, right? So these guys, wherever they settle down, they will, play a significant role in the development of these kingdoms and countries. And they're going to mix and blend in with the population and adopt the religions of the people. And they're going to connect wherever they go. They're going to stay connected, right? Those trade networks, those trade routes across the seas, the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, right? The Mediterranean, the Black Sea. And they're all going to be connected thanks to the Vikings. And at the same time as the Vikings are going about and conquering and spreading everywhere, there's going to be another group of invaders called the Magyars. Now, the Magyars originally, they come from Hungary, but their ancestors are the Huns. And the Huns originally come from Central Asia, the Central Asian steppe, right? Same place where the Mongols are going to be from. And of course, you should remember the Huns. The Huns were the ones who brought down the Roman Empire, or helped bring it down. The Huns, or at least another group of them called the White Huns, are the ones who brought down the Gupta Empire in India, right? Marking the end of the classical era. Well, the Magyars are going to go in and wreak havoc and destruction and chaos on parts of, Central Europe and Eastern Europe, right, from their home base right here in Hungary. And even though eventually they're going to adopt Christianity, they're not going to adopt it as fast as the Vikings did. Now, the third set of invasions came from the Muslims, and they came from the south. Remember, here we have the Islamic or Muslim Caliphate, right? The Umayyads and the Abbasids, right, controlling the Middle East and controlling North Africa. We know that the Moors, right, these are the North African Berbers, are going to travel to Spain. They're going to conquer Spain. It's going to be known as Al-Andalus. They're going to build their capital of Cordoba, right, which became one of the second largest city in Europe, second only to Constantinople. Cordoba was a cultural center, an education center, right? Cordoba was the place where Jews and Christians and Muslims lived together with tolerance and peace. And these same Muslims, when they try to go into the Frankish or the Carolingian Empire, they're going to be pushed back by Charles the Hammer Martel at the Battle of Tours, right, stopping further advancements of the Islamic faith into Western Europe. The Muslims are, however, they're going to conquer southern Italy, right, what we now call Naples and Sicily, right? Those territories will be Muslim-held territories for a long time. Eventually the Byzantines and then later on the Vikings, the Normans kicked them out. But they got pretty close. Rome is right there, right? That's where the Pope is. So the Pope was very, very cautious and scared about the threat of Islam coming in into Europe. So what's the result of all this violence? What's the result of all these invasions and these conquests, right? We see a new form of government develop in Europe. Europe could not be reestablished into a centralized empire like China was, right, with the Tang and the Song, or it couldn't create a new type of empire like the caliphates. Instead, they developed feudalism. And feudalism we're going to see the same thing develop in Japan, and this was something that happened in China back in the Zhao dynasty, back in time period Unit 1. But feudalism is a political system where the king controls all the land in his kingdom. There is no private property, everything belongs to the king. But the king cannot manage or control or supervise or even protect his entire kingdom. So he's going to break up his kingdom into different sections, different regions, different territories, known as fiefs. And each fief is going to be managed and ruled by a lord, a noble. Sometimes these nobles are given different titles like earls or dukes or counts. And these different noble lords are going to rule over their fiefs, rule over the territory assigned to them by their king, and they're going to rule on behalf of the king. But they're going to have a lot of power because the king is far away. The king isn't directly supervising them, so they could do pretty much whatever they want. So they're almost independent rulers. Now, they pay taxes and provide aid and show loyalty to their king, but pretty much they rule their territory entirely on their own. Whether that territory is an earldom or a duchy or a county, right? The different names of the different territories ruled by the nobles. Now, these nobles are, of course, are going to need help when it comes to defending the territories against invaders, right? Whether it's the Vikings or whether it's the Magyars or the Muslims or other Christians, other nobles. These nobles are going to give part of their land to the knights. And the knights are going to fight on behalf of the lords are going to fight on behalf of the king, and this is the system of feudalism. Now, this is a political system, right? It is completely decentralized. The king is in charge, but not really. All right, the lords have a lot of power, and if the king, is too weak, or there is no clear successor to the kingdom, to the throne, it is very possible that a lord can rise up and take over the kingdom and become the new king. Now, at the bottom of this feudal system, we have the peasants, which is the vast majority of the people. 99% of the people are going to be peasants. They're going to be farmers mainly. There's going to be some craftspeople, some artisans here and there, but not too much. Now, the feudal system is also the social structure of medieval Europe, right? Kings, nobility, knights, peasants. And that's it. Right? Those are your groups. So it is a political system, but it is also a social system. And in this social system, there is no social mobility. At least not from the peasants. They cannot move up. A peasant can never, ever rise up to become a knight, because the knights are part of the nobility. Now, some knights might be able to become lords, and some lords might be able to become kings, but a peasant is a peasant is a peasant is a peasant, and they can never move up. Now, the peasants, even though they have no social standing, because they're at the bottom, and they have no political authority whatsoever, they're crucial, because they produce what everyone needs, and that is food and goods and supplies. They're the blacksmiths, they're the carpenters, they're the farmers. So the peasants provide all these goods and supplies and food to the knights, and in return the knights protect the peasants, right? And the peasants provide the same food for their lords, and then in return the lords provides protections and law and order, right? Because the lords are also the judges and the executioners. And so it is a mutual beneficial system. Right? Each one has responsibilities to the other classes, right? And they get benefits from the other classes. So the peasants get to live. That's their benefit. The lords and the knights, they get food and supplies in return for service and loyalty in war. So that's the feudal system. Now there's going to be serfs. Let's talk about the serfs, because the serfs are the lowest of the low. They're almost like slaves. Right, and they're below the peasant. They're kind of like a special type of peasant. They work the land like a peasant would, but they don't own anything. They don't have any rights. They don't even have the right to get married without the permission of their lord. They are not allowed to leave the land, like move from one farm to another, one village to another, unless they get special permission from their lord. But they're not slaves because they can't be, bought or sold. But they don't have any rights, and they could get beaten up and abused, and they had no way of getting justice. Now, peasants might have some rights, especially if you're skilled, like if you're a craftsman or artisan, you might have some rights, but not too much. Right? You're still super poor, and you don't really own the land, because everything that you work on, all that farm land that you work on 24/7, and the house that you built for yourself and your family, that's not really yours. That belongs to the Lord. So you got to pay rent to use it. So even though you're producing all the food that the Lord eats and the knights eat and the kings eat, that's the payment for your life. You pay rent, you pay food rent, basically, to the kings. So these are your sad, dirty, peasants, vast majority, 99% of the people. You have your lords, here you see a king. The lord bows down to the king, paying homage, paying respect. The king gives him land. This guy gives him service and loyalty. And, knights, of course, are going to be part of the upper class, right? No, there are no peasant knights. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about is the manor system. It is the economic system of Europe during the Middle Ages, during the post-classical era. And basically, Europe shuts itself away from the rest of the world. It shuts itself away from long-distance interregional trade, for at least the first half of the post-classical era, from around 600 to the year 1100 or so. And this is what most historians call the Dark Ages. And the reason they shut themselves off, not only because they're being invaded from all sides and creating the feudal government for protection, the manor system is self-sufficient, meaning that they can produce all the goods that they need. Their food, their weapons, their housing, their clothing, everything is handmade, everything is self-made, self-produced. They don't need to buy anything from faraway places. They don't have any luxury goods like spices and silk and cotton and ivory, stuff like that. So they're not going to trade. And of course, remember, with all the violence and chaos and political instability of the Dark Ages, there weren't going to be any merchants traveling on these roads getting, easily killed. So the manor system is the economic system. It is based, of course, on agriculture, based on the work of the peasants. The knights, provide protection. The lords provide rent or land to rent. And that's it. All right, that's the economy of Europe. So no trade, not yet at least. Just a lot of agriculture, very self-sufficient. And here we see in this diagram, and the kind of the cooperation between the social classes of the feudal society. These peasants produce all the food, all the supplies. They provide it to the nobles. The nobles give them land and protection. The nobles use give land and supplies to the soldiers. The soldiers fight for the king. The soldiers fight for the nobles. Sometimes you have towns, and these towns, I wouldn't call them cities because they're probably not big enough to be cities. These towns are going to have what are called free peasants or franklins. They're also called freemen, where they don't have to pay taxes to the lords. They're considered free from that payment. And these freemen are basically like the, it's skilled people. It's craftsmen. It's, people who work, producing goods. But during this time, they're very, very small in population. They're going to grow in importance later on when we see a lot of changes. All right, so we're going to stop here with our Section 2. I thank you for watching. I hope that this video does not get cut off. And I'm going to wait a few minutes before I stop recording just to make sure it continues all the way through. So tired. I know, right? These AP kids, they're the worst. What can I tell you?